Hey, welcome from Zululand, KwaZulu-Natal province in South Africa at the University of Zululand. I am going to go sit at my new desk, temporary desk, while I'm here. So today I'm going to tell you about the courts. What are the courts for? Have you seen Judge Judy, People's Court, Judge Jean? There's multiple shows on TV right now, pertaining to your generation on TV right now about courts. I grew up watching People's Court, so that's what I remember. And of course, Judge Judy makes about $20–30 million a year to just yell at people and settle their little minor disputes. We have civil courts like that are aimed at helping people solve disputes between one party and another. So you sue someone who's wronged you, say destroyed your property, damaged your property, something like that, owes you money, didn't pay you, didn't honor a contract. Those are called torts. It's the civil term for like a crime, an act of wrongdoing. And the point of a civil court is to give you restitution, to pay you back for the money that you deserve. It's not to punish the offender. Criminal courts now, that's about punishment. So if a person commits a wrongful act that violates the criminal law against the state, then that's handled in the state courts. And if a person commits a crime that violates the federal law, that's handled in the federal courts. Now that's an important point to remember if you're going to major in criminal justice or take other classes, even though it might be hard to understand. Crime is an act against the government. So if you commit a crime in the state of North Carolina, something that violates state law, then say murder or burglary or theft or something within the state, that's what gives the state the authority to arrest you, convict you, punish you. If you commit a crime against the federal government, say something violating the federal law, that could be a murder of a federal official or a crime that crosses state lines that involves interstate commerce or transportation across state lines, or just something that's specifically illegal at the federal level, like treason or something like that. Then the federal government has the authority to investigate you, arrest you, convict you, and punish you. Now, criminal courts also can issue fines where you pay the government as punishment, and they can order restitution to the victim, similar to civil courts. But the purpose is to right the wrong involving the criminal law. Now, why don't we give the government the authority to do this? Why is the crime not against the victim per se, but against the government? Very simple. Before the establishment of governments and criminal courts, people would take the law into their own hands. And so if someone harmed you, you would harm them, seek justice for yourself. And oftentimes that will lead to a process called escalation. So someone hurt your partner. You go and hurt them and their partner. Their partner was innocent. Well, then their partner's family, the other person's partner's family, comes after your family and they're innocent. Like the Hatfield and the McCoys. If you don't know that story, look it up. The idea of escalation where you end up with something that's not over, it never ends, repeated harms just keeps going on and on. The advantage of having the courts and the government punish is that it's over at that point. Someone commits a murder, they receive the death penalty, it's over. Someone commits a murder, they receive a life sentence, it's over. The victim, so to speak, has to live with that. The victim's family has to live with that. This is why we give governments this authority. So you have civil courts that handle personal disputes. You have criminal courts that handle crimes against the government. Courts, however, do way more than that. First, they interpret the law. Now that might sound silly, but oftentimes the law is written so broadly that courts have to tell us what it means and specifically what it means. So for example, when I was in the state of Florida working for the legislature, the House of Representatives Criminal Justice Committee, as a legislative analyst, there was an issue of, well, it's what the state of Florida called sexual battery as opposed to rape. The state changed their statute to try to encourage people to report sexual assaults by making it encouraging victims to report it by making it sound not so intimidating. To rape sounds really horrific, but sexual battery, maybe people would be more likely to report it. That's the idea. So it says, the definition of the crime, I'll use the word person. So forcing a person to engage in sexual acts against their will. Well, does a person include a man? So we think of the crime of sexual battery as a crime against females. In fact, it's often also committed against males. So the court had to interpret that to tell us, yes, that's what, sorry, something was in my face. That's what courts do. Think of Obamacare. Was that constitutional? Is it consistent with the Constitution? The courts, in this case the US Supreme Court has ultimate authority on these issues, had to make that determination by interpreting the Constitution. The Eighth Amendment bans cruel and unusual punishment. But what does that mean? Cruel and unusual punishment is not defined in the Constitution. So the court has to interpret that. And if you look at death penalty cases, that's exactly what they've done. They've had to interpret what that means today by today's standards and our interpretation of the Constitution today, since it was never defined. Courts also handle appeals after a case is over. If you're convicted of a crime, you have the right to appeal that conviction on any matter of law to state and federal court. Now, some of these rights to appeal are limited. They're discretionary. So that means you have to pay for them. You have to be able to afford it. But you can argue that you're wrongfully incarcerated, that you're wrongly convicted, that you had an incompetent attorney, that the prosecution withheld evidence, and these sorts of things. The courts make that determination as well. So in death penalty cases, if you can imagine, 2 out of every 3 people who've appealed their death sentence have had their death sentence overturned on appeal by either a state or a federal court. Now, this is not some quote-unquote technicality. This is a serious constitutional violation. So someone's convicted of murder and sentenced to death, and they find out the prosecution eliminated all the potential black jurors from the jury in violation of the law, or they withheld evidence that the person might be innocent. This is something that's going to lead to a death sentence being overturned, even if the person's still actually guilty of murder. Typically when that happens, their death sentence is reduced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. So they're not released, they're just not going to be executed. So this is what the courts do for us. They help us settle disputes between individual parties. They help us solve crimes, that is, convict and punish criminals. They interpret the law to tell us what it means, and they handle appeals. And what else do? They sentence the convicted to punishment. So police investigate a crime, make an arrest, courts take over to determine legal and factual guilt of the person charged with the crime. That's ideally handled through a trial. You'll see in the class that between 90, 95, even in some cases 99% of criminal felonies, accused felons, are handled in plea bargains as opposed to trials. And then if you're convicted, the court sentences you to punishment based on the law. So you'll see more about all of this in your book, and that is in essence what the courts do. Greetings from South Africa.